Hi everyone, welcome to Afro-Lit Marathon. We're going to be looking at a series of African literary works. Okay, so this is series one. We're going to be looking at the books Things Fall Apart, as well as The River Between, as well as Purple Hibiscus. Now, for those who need to be reminded, Things Fall Apart is by Professor Chinua Achebe. The River Between is by Professor Ngugiwa Thiong'o, as well as Purple Hibiscus by Our Lady Chimamandi Ngozi Adichie. Yes, right. So these are the three books that we're going to be looking at in this first series. By the way, if you'd like to participate in the selection of more books for the following series, do join our Facebook group. Okay, the link will be shared in the description below, as well as further interaction where these books are concerned. You can join that in the link below. Right, so we're going to be looking at these different books from a general analytical point of view, as well as to assist those who are taking on such studies for academic purposes. So we'll be looking at the plot structure. We'll be placing these different concepts into the plot diagram. To assist those who are taking on such studies for that purpose. But also we're going to have fun with it. It's going to be an interactive session, and I definitely would appreciate hearing your views as well. Now, I'm your servant, Kwanda Ngesi, and I've got my master's in education, and I actually have taught American literature at high school level, and some of the experience I have, as well as some of the concepts I used, I actually took and, analyzed my own favorite, African works, and this has sort of informed, my analysis and my approach in sharing these summaries. Okay, so let's interact. Let's make the most of this experience together. Starting off with Things Fall Apart. All right. So Things Fall Apart. Okay, we'll be looking at themes, summary, as well as the plot diagram. Okay. But a bit about the author first. Professor Chinua Achebe was born to Father Isaiah Okafo Achebe and Mother Janet Anechi on the 16th of November 1930 in eastern Nigeria, and his parents converted to Christianity. This is quite important to take note of. The Protestant church mission in Nigeria. And he grew up in a culture where storytelling was an integral part of society. He loved stories growing up, and he also loved attending Igbo traditional ceremonies. Now, again, this is something else to take note of. Very important too. So he entered the St. Philip's Central School in 1936 and first was placed in a class with much younger kids, but later moved to a higher class due to his noted intelligence. Now, I wanted to underline those 2 points because they sort of help us to understand, what informs the author's perspective. He writes about both the religious as well as the cultural perspective, and it's good to take note of the fact that he was groomed in both, and so he's not necessarily biased towards one or the other, but he talks, about the good points as well as the points of potential improvement on both these the religious as well as the cultural aspect of things. And so yes, his upbringing helps us to understand that part of his writing. And so he attended weekly Sunday school and accompanied his father in the evangelical activities. At age 12, he moved to study at a school where his brother John taught, and he became exposed to more traditional practices. And he continued to excel in his studies and attended prestigious British schools where he formed reading clubs. And he went on to receive a bursary to study medicine. But through higher interest in the flawed manner by which Africans were perceived, Achebe opted to abandon medicine and study towards making an impact in the way Africans were perceived. A matter of purpose, right? And so, thus, he studied English, history, and theology instead of medicine, and he forfeited his medicine bursary. And he later received a government bursary, and his family also helped, towards paying for his studies. Okay, this is just a little bit about our author, all right, Professor Chinua Achebe. Okay, So when we look at the book Things Fall Apart, we're going to start off with the different characters, okay? So there's first Unoka, who is the father of Okonko. Now, this is a very important character, though not much is said about him. We learn a bit about him, just enough to know that, he, has values or lived according to values which Okonko absolutely hated. He is described as a person not very, very ambitious. He's sort of a person described to be dwelling in his head and creative, imaginative, poetic, musical. He played the flute, and he was also quite in debt, so, and he lived with that conditioning. We don't see him as a hard worker. We don't see him doing much about that, but we rather see him, using a play on words, finding ways to just get himself out of situations and not necessarily working hard, to establishing himself and establishing a legacy, for himself as well as his family. So this is the character, Noka, the father of Okonkwo. And on the contrary, we see Okonkwo, his son, who has an absolutely totally different, personality, and in fact, even a drive to be absolutely different from how his father was like. So Okonkwo is described as a person who's, a leader, who's strong in personality, even quite aggressive because he's quite ambitious and he's driven to just, be the best that he can be because he sort of has this fear. He doesn't want to be like his father, so it is so much that it is almost like a fear, right? And so he does everything in his power to not be like his father, because his father ultimately, died in the evil forest, right? Which was sort of a shameful death. He died a shameful death, so he wanted everything not to be like his own father. Okonkwo, resultingly had even three wives, which is, a sign of prestige in the community, right? You even have three wives, right? You're that wealthy. So he had three wives, and he had two barns of yams, so it was amazing, what he built himself and his family towards. So his wives, okay, so there's mother of Noye, we don't really get to know her name, and there's Ikwefu, which is the mother of Azimna. This is also seemingly Okonkwo's favorite wife, and daughter Azimna is, sort of his last remaining daughter from this wife who had this condition of losing, children, or they would grow and die while they're still young. So there's Ikwefu, the second wife, whom Okonkwo, seemingly loved more than the other wives, and also loved the daughter Ezinna more, than anyone else, more than his other children. And then there's Ojiugo, the youngest wife, who's described as materialistic. Yeah, quite materialistic, and all about how well can I look and things like that. We also have Chielo, the oracle, the old woman, a very well respected woman in society who sometimes get overcome by powers, right, which are above her own human capability, and she's able to do things, sort of driven by the spirit. And so, because of that ability, everybody respected her, and certain decisions in the community could not be done unless she would approve. They would come to her, and she would have to give that approval again after consulting, the spiritual powers, and what she said will be what would be done. So she had that, that presence, that aura about her, and her name is Chielo, okay, a very respectful woman, respected woman. And then we have Obirika, who's Okonkwo's friend, right? He also is the one, when Okonkwo was in exile, was the one sort of giving him some information that, okay, this is what's happening, this is what, he kept on updating Okonkwo. His name is Obirika. Also have Ogbefu Ezwedu. So Ogbefu is a wise elder, in a situation where Okonkwo, was about to sort of do something not necessarily wise. He warned him, don't do this, right? Don't participate in the killing of this young lad. We'll explain that a bit later. And Okonkwo failed to listen and sort of regretted afterwards. So Ogbefu Izwedu is one of those wise elders, and he's one of those that spoke wisdom to Okonkwo at a time of need. We also have Uchendo, who is Okonko's uncle, who assisted him, number one, to appreciate being received by his mother's hometown, because Okonko had issues with that, as well as assisting him to build himself up when he was in exile. And then we also have Ikemafuna, who is the sacrificial lad, all right, very respectful boy, unfortunately, who had a life that was sort of unfair. And so these are the characters that we look at in, Things Fall Apart. Do share which one is your favorite character, right? And it's quite interesting. The more you read about these characters and what they participate in, you get to sort of see maybe a part of yourself. You get those situations where you see yourself in, I see myself in Unoka, or hey, I see myself in Ezinna, or I see myself in Uchendo, all right? So, those kind of experiences are also pretty cool. Do share if you see yourself in any of these characters that we talked about and will continue talking about in this book. All right, the next part, in the next section, we will view some of the themes in the novel. All right, in the novel, Things Fall Apart. So, some of the themes include identity, they include determination, unity versus individuality, masculinity versus femininity, religion versus culture, colonization versus or colonization as well as justice. Okay, so these are some of the themes that we look at. Just to begin with, let's look at masculinity versus femininity first. Um, yeah, so that one is quite interesting because the book, the main character, the protagonist here, Okonko, is described as very masculine, right? He's absolutely masculine. He's very dominant. He's quite aggressive, and whatever he does, even the way that he leads his own home, the way that he carries himself, the way that he leads his family, is quite masculine kind of a way. And masculine in the sense that he proves his power and his strength, especially physically. Even the way he will speak, it will be a dominant kind of a speaking. He has that kind of a presence. And um, and then there's also issues of femininity, right? There comes the strong leader, but he becomes quite closely attached to his daughter versus his son, right? Sort of a question of femininity versus masculinity. That though Noye, the older son, is the boy, he sort of portrays, characteristic which are, feminine in comparison to Okonko, and whereas um, Zimna, his daughter, portrays the kind of characteristics that he prefers, that determination that he likes, that ongoing spirit, that I don't give up, the same spirit that Okonko appreciates, which in his mind comes across as more masculine. And so he gets along with Zimna more than he gets along with his own son, Noe. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that masculinity versus femininity interplay in the novel. We also see it, for example, in how the decisions, made in by the community were made by the leaders, which were male leaders. They were the ones to sit and discuss, this is what will happen. Here's a case, regardless of who is involved, but the leaders, the male leaders will sit and decide, what will happen. However, there are certain important decisions which those male leaders could not do. They relied on the oracle, they relied on Chielo, that old woman, to be the one to actually share with, that this is what you should do in this situation. And what she said, they would not go against. So though they are the ones who make the decisions, she's the one, whose power is very well received, and she's female, masculinity versus femininity interplay there as well. Similarly, how Okonko, carried himself in Umofia, and he was this dominant leader, winning fights and doing all sorts of things. And yet, when he was in exile, the one place that could receive him, which he did not really want, was his mother's home. His mother's home is the one that assisted to groom and nurture and cultivate him, right, in his moment of being in exile. It helped him to sort of start afresh, in that 7 year period, and be in a position once again to return, with his head held intact, right, with his, call it his pride, right, feeling as if, I've accomplished something still. And so once again, that masculinity versus the femininity. It's described in so many different ways in the book, and we see that, I would even say a balance, right? I feel the author wanted to sort of portray a balance between masculinity versus femininity, because you see them both, sort of interchanged, right? Yeah. So the one instance you see this, and then you see, another part to sort of blend and balance the other. So I see that as well balanced, right? That concept there. And so, looking at the other themes, we look, for example, at identity. Now, this is quite important because it starts off with this young Okonko, right, who is the son of Unoka. And Unoka has got this, this reputation of being a person who has not really accomplished anything, who owes everybody, almost everybody in the village, who is in debt, who's not a person of their word, who dies a shameful death, who leaves nothing as an inheritance for his family. And so Okonkwo looks at the situation, and Okonkwo is absolutely, enraged by this, and he does not want anything to do. He does not want to be associated with Unoka, his father. And so we see a person here who's trying by all means to detach from this one identity. He's trying to detach from that, and sort of simultaneously seeking to create and establish a different one from the one that he begins with. So, he fights to, as much as his father was not really a fighter, we see him being that fighter. We see him winning battles. We see him beating Amalenza the cat, which is, a very good title that he gets, and which is quite important for him to get, because it gives him that status that he so desires. His father had no word, no voice, no say in clan meetings, and yet he comes and he is one of the prominent leaders in clan meetings. His voice is heard, his opinions, they're respected. So he goes on, he grows to being this person who is absolutely determined, but more determined to sort of attach to one identity and build this one identity, which is absolutely different from the one that was from his father Unoka. Okay, so this is now a person who strives to be so attached to the identity of the tribe, and this is important also because when later on the identity of the tribe shifts, it affects him, it affects his makeup, it affects the who I am of him. In fact, he's who I am. Okay, because now he all of what he stood for was what the tribe stood for. And so if the tribe is changing, it means that he would need to change. And it was a hard pill for him to swallow. And so that's one of the themes that is there. It's quite an important theme, one of identity, sort of even attached to a fear, right? I don't want to be like this. I've got this fear, but now my way of curbing this is to attach to this identity and keep these values so much and live, to these values, and make sure that my family also abides by these values, because these values are so important to me. And so when the values change, you can imagine, it really took him off guard. Another theme that is discussed in the book, or that we see as we analyze the book, is that of determination or drive, right? Again, this is sort of something good because, because of that fear, the one thing that he doesn't really want to be like his own father, he's sort of driven and motivated to become the best version of himself, right? So we see him moving from a zero to hero kind of a person because of this determination and drive that he has. He needs, to go the extra mile. He needs to be consistent. He cannot be lazy. He cannot slack. He has got to all the time and always, be at this kind of a level, because this is who he is. And if he doesn't, he may just fall into the trap of being like his very own father, which he doesn't. And so and because of that, because of how society appreciates that kind of characteristic, we get to appreciate Okonko. We get to appreciate and love him for what he does. We become inspired by him. We look at him and say, you know what, young people should be more like him. You don't have to allow yourself to be stuck in whatever situation you began in. You can actually rise up from whatever the situation, become, the best version of yourself. We learn all of that from Okonko. This is what he does, because indeed he started from negative conservative, and he moved to, being a very prominent leader in the community. Okay, so he inspires us, to see life in that kind of a way as well. Right, and another theme that we find is that of unity versus individuality. Again, the unity, we saw how a lot of what kept the people of Mafia together was that they were united. Right, if they like you, if you are part of the group, then you hear. But if you are an outcast, then all of them essentially will disregard of you. Right, so the shared values, kept them all united. And even in how decisions were being made, a unit comes together in a democratic manner. We discussed this, voted if need be, but this is our collective view of this, and this is what we as the people of Umofia will do. When they will chant out Umofia Kwenu, all those kind of ways to show how these people, we are one, right? We are one in this, we have this one voice, we have this one spirit that we are living by. Now, Okonkwo was part of this unity, right? He was part of this unity and part of the people that was keeping this unity. However, when the exile period came, it's quite interesting. He then sort of becomes out of this unity. In his exile period, he was out of this unity, and the unity was sort of influenced, by wrongful interjections, right? And he now is silenced. He wants to influence. He cannot. He's silenced. He's an exile. He returns, hoping to, shape and restore what was once there. And he finds that now, the mindset of the group is different. So now he is sort of, different. So now he becomes the individual who's trying to bring people to one point of view, and they're not of that similar point of view. And so there we see an interplay of him being on the one side, on the side of unity, as well as on being on the side of individuality. And we see how both of these affected him, right, in some way or another. Okay, also another theme that we see is that of religion versus culture. It's quite interesting and quite important also that we understood that the author himself came from both backgrounds. Yeah, so he had both the religious upbringing, right, from the Protestant church, as well as he had the cultural, influence, and he participated in cultural practices. So his view is sort of like, non-biased, right? It understands both the cultural as well as the religious, and it equally is able to. And it does portray the flaws of both, the flaws as well as the benefits and the advantages of both. And so when we look at this, like for example, the religious aspect, it's portrayed as as one that comes to bring hope, to people which were alienated by the cultural aspect, right? Because for example, culture had certain people which it outcasted, right? There were certain people which were outcast, and fair or not, but they were just outcast because they were not, there. No, like because of the values of the culture. So religion comes and says, regardless of whether you are the outcast, regardless of whether people accept you, there is a God above who comes and accept everyone for who they are, and come as you are. And so those people naturally and easily were able to join this religious system, right? And it's quite interesting because even where the religion was sort of started, it was the church was in that evil forest, and yet in that evil forest, this church goes and it grows and it blooms, and it's not influenced by that evil, the curse of the evil forest. And so people are looking at it like, what the mystery of this, right? The mystery of this. There must be some power in this. And so, there's that wonder, okay, what the message that these people are bringing is true, So that one aspect is portrayed. However, the very same religion that comes, to bring love and hope to people and accept people is the very same doorway that leads to the colonizers coming and taking over the people, taking over their land, taxing the people, introducing a foreign legal system, right, imposing their own values on the people's culture. At gunpoint, you do this or you get fined, you do this or, and through the same doorway, which sort of initially came, bringing peace, it later on comes and it's bringing havoc. So, on the other hand, culture is also portrayed, for its positive light, how it brought people together, people are able to celebrate together, and they share their values, they united because of this culture. And however, on the other hand, there's certain things which culture was sort of suppressing other people. For example, if you had twins, according to the cultural practices, you had to kill. Twins were seen as a curse, and so they will be cast into the forbidden forest or into the evil forest, regardless of how the parents felt. So certain of those things which people looked at and felt, what, this cultural practice, the way things are done. Some people are being suppressed by how things are done, and however, the same culture which had those flaws was also the one way that people were able to keep their values intact, were able to have their reputation, continue living, in a mutually, call it beneficial, or in a way that mutually, is beneficial, for most of the group who are in line with the values of the group. Okay, there was also the theme of colonization, right? When you see of colonization again being introduced by religion, we see how it came and it grew and it took over, right? And it took over, and certain people which were prominent leaders, were even used to sort of like introduce this amongst people. We see how some people were benefiting from the arrival of those colonizers, the arrival of the system, and even when the new arrival of this different legal system was introduced. It was always messengers from the local community which were sent to come and relay the message. So we find how colonization sort of was a blend of what the intruders were bringing, as well as how the locals were benefiting, and some of them were benefiting, and sort of betraying their own people in the process. Sort of something of that nature, and it grows to overpower, to sort of dominate everything, and it changed the values such that Okonkwo was not able to identify with the very people of his land, just because he was distant, at a time when all of these changes were happening. So you can imagine the changes were happening very, very quickly, being introduced by the system of colonization. Last but definitely not least, we look at the theme of justice, or even lack thereof. Okay, because again, the systems that were being introduced, starting off with the cultural practices, they were not necessarily just. For example, here comes a situation where in a neighboring village offended the people of India. And in order for them to appease the situation, they were asked to send two people, to send a virgin lady as well as a sacrificial lad. The Virgin Lady, without a choice, was given over as a wife, and the sacrificial lamb was going to be killed. Now, again, some people could feel as if that was going to be there to appease, the anger of the people of Umofia. But what about the lives of those people that were affected? Because their opinions didn't matter, their choices didn't matter. They just happened to be the unfortunate ones which the community sacrificed and said, what, to appease this, we are going to send you, and especially with Ikemefuna, the sacrificial lad, he didn't even know why he was brought there. He didn't even know how long he was going to stay there. He didn't know, he didn't know the intentions of the people that brought him there. But yeah, unfortunately, that was the system that was being used. Similarly to the one of twins, okay, where things are not necessarily fair, right? But we see that it being discussed. Same as on the religious aspect, where we see, the arrival of religion, assisting some people, but also bringing a system to oppress the very same people that it initially assisted, something which is not necessarily fair. The treatment of women, how they didn't really have much of a voice, how it was okay for them to be beaten if they don't do things according to what they told. So those kind of things were being, are shared in the book, not because the author subscribes to that, but just to show us what was going on at the time. Thank you so much. Okay, so for this part, we're starting off at the summary. Okay, so again, in case you read this book at an earlier age, long time ago, you maybe forgot about it, maybe you have not yet read the book, the summary can assist you with that. So things fall apart. It begins off with introduction of Okonkwo's father, Unoka. So we get to, to learn about Unoka. We get to learn of, some traits about him that he's not really an achiever. He hasn't really achieved much, but more than anything else, if you were to put it blunt, he comes across as lazy, as what, he's just stuck up in his head. He's just got all these ideas. He's quite imaginative. He's creative. He uses play on words to to devise ways out of sticky situations. So he comes across as that kind of a person. A person who's not really true to their word, who's not necessarily a person of their word, but a person who is good at playing the flute, a person who's quite creative, but a person who doesn't accomplish much because he doesn't have the necessary grit, the necessary willpower, the necessary hard work that's required, to achieve important things. So eventually he dies a shameful death. He dies in the evil forest, and we see how this bad reputation of Okonkwo's father is a reputation which he wants nothing to be associated with, and the young people in their neighborhood sort of mock at him because of this, right? Because hey, you are the one whose father died that shameful death, right? What did your father leave you? Nothing, right? Hey, maybe even death. So Okonkwo, starts off a person who doesn't like what the legacy that his father left, right, or lack thereof, and he starts off being a person who's so determined to just proving himself, that he can be anything but, his father. He can rise up and be much better than what his father was able to accomplish. So he does this very, very well. Whereas his father, barely could keep one wife, Okonkwo had three. Whereas his father did not have any crop, or Congo had two barns, filled with yam, an important type of crop in the village, in the community, a crop of wealth, So, whereas Okonkwo's father did not have a say in clan meetings, he had a say. His voice was heard, his opinion was even asked, right? Because he had that value, he worked himself to have that. Whereas his father was not necessarily one who would, fight when, and participate in such, village fights for entertainment and stuff. Kongo comes across as even beating, Amalinza the cat was one of the, the strongest fighters, well titled fighter, and Okonkwo came and he beat that fighter. That's just how driven Okonkwo is portrayed to be. He was a leader, he was quite strong and masculine and quite aggressive in his approach. Even how he led his family, he was he had this, like the author says, he led his family with an iron fist, right? Yeah, you do what I say or else. So he comes across as that very strong, leader, but also one who accomplishes things, one who gets things done, one who will see things through, So that's the kind of person that he is. And so it so happens that in the village, this one time, there was an offense that is committed. Okay, there was an offense that is committed. well, I mentioned again Okonkwo's brilliance. I mentioned his values, right, which were that of being in line with the, with the tribe. What the tribe stood for was what Okonkwo stood for. He was a person who really was all about those values, and he wanted his identity to be aligned with that of the community because that is where he felt he had his respect. He had his honor, and so he wanted so much to maintain those in fear that one day he could be like his father who died the shameful death. And so there was an offense by a neighboring village, right? They came and they happened to kill one of the daughters of Mafia, this village. And so, because the village of Umofia was a very, was a well-respected village, so those people came to sort of apologize, and the way to sort of appease for the situation was said to be that um, they should send a virgin who will be given, as a wife, as well as they should send a sacrificial lad. And, the villagers will decide what they'll do about that sacrificial lad. And so that is how Ikemefuna, the sacrificial lad, ended up, being introduced to Mafia. And he was kept in the household of Okonko. Okay, again, Okonko was one of the main leaders in the village. And so Okonko had a son, right? He had a son named Noye, who was sort of, similar in characteristic to Unoka, his father, that he so hated, right? He had those traits which Okonko was trying his best to remove from his son. His son came across as lazy, came across as, wanting the easy way out and things, and Okonko hated that about his son. He was trying to use his force to sort of force him to, step out of that. But unfortunately, the more he was doing that, the more he was pushing his son away. It was not really working to his favor. He also had a daughter, Azimna, who had a similar personality to his personality, right? Who was also driven, who was also sort of accomplishing things like he was. And so he was sort of closer to his daughter Azimna than he was his son Noye. But now this sacrificial lad came and he was older than Noye, and he sort of brought more influence in the life of Noya. When Noya could not bond with his father, he was able to bond with the Kemefuna, the sacrificial lad. And so he associated, himself with him, and he sort of saw him as a brother. He loved him, right? As a matter of fact, Kemefuna arrived not knowing his fate in the village, not understanding why he even was brought to this village, but, the kind of personality that he had, he was respectful, he was doing what he needed to do, he even was calling Okonko father, sort of blending in this family, trying by all means to blend in this family. And so later on, though, it so happened that, the villagers sat together and decided, you know what, let's do something about the sacrificial land and let's kill him. And one of the wise leaders, Iswedu, came and advised Okonko and said, I don't, I recommend you be part of this. The villagers want to kill this boy, and I advise you to not take a part of this because, hey, he calls you father, so he's as good as your own son. And so the villagers decide they're going to kill Kemefuna, and something comes up, something comes, and Okonko feels sort of overwhelmed by the need to not come across as weak, right? Not come across as though he's affected by, the sacrificial lead, and, he's sort of now attached to the sacrificial lead. And so because of that, though being warned to not participate in the killing of the sacrificial lead, who calls him father, Okonko goes ahead and still, participates in killing Kemefuna. And Noye becomes aware of this. And because of that, Noye hates his father so much, that one act drives Noye practically away from home, away from the household of Okonko, away from the values that Okonko stands for. He just is driven away from home. And soon after that, by mistake, Okonko's knife happens, or rifle happens to kill someone in the marketplace. Okay, so now the marketplace was a place where a lot of these, festivities, funerals, weddings, and all of these rituals were happening in the community. This is one place, that brought the villagers together. It's also where they would barter trade or, exchange and sell things, and like a marketplace. And so, by accident, this happens. And because it's an accident, sort of leniency is applied. But because someone died, something needs to be done. And so it is said that Okonkwo had to leave Umofia immediately, right, with everything that belongs to him. And so he had to make a speedy departure with his family, leave his compound behind, his riches behind, and, he had to run away, somewhere far away. And so, though he did not like this, the place that was receptive of him, the place that could receive him in this time of exile, was his mother's home. Okay, so his uncle Uchendu, was willing to assist him and gave him sharecrop, and he was able to start from scratch again and sort of build himself in the period of that 7 years, in that 7 year period. And after that, he would be allowed to return, back to Mofia. And so he does that. However, in that 7 year period, while Okonkwo was away, with Eberika bringing him some information, this is what's happening, this is what's happening in Mafia, right? His friend, sort of visiting him now and again. It so happened that he was informed that, well, there are people that came, they brought this, this religion, and so he kept being informed of the things which were happening in Umofia. Soon enough, the people brought religion. Soon enough, were bringing the tax system. Soon enough, the legal system being used in Umofia had changed, right? And so now people had to follow the law which was imposed to them by the judge, which was not even from their culture, didn't even understand the values of the people, but was judging from their own cultural perspective. So all of this was happening, and Okonkwo is in exile in this period, and he's just so highly affected by this, because if we remember, this is the identity that he worked so hard, to be associated with. And so that change, as all of these changes were happening, they were sort of changing the identity which he had worked so much to be a part of. And so he sort of took it personally that, if this is what's happening, then this is changing this. What about this? And a lot of things were changing, and he was sort of feeling powerless, but also enraged, because he wanted to do something about this, and he felt that he could collapse the 7 year period so he could come, and at least contribute, because he could not contribute while on exile. So the 7 year period continued, and the changes continued. The mindset of the people changed. And Okongo is still trying by all means to, express himself, project his views, but they were not heard. They were not heard. And so changes took place both in Umofia as well as in their hometown, in his mother's hometown, and he did not have a voice in both of these places. So it was sort of a problem, that he was faced with. All of these changes are happening around him, but he does not have the power to influence either. And so, when the 7 year period came to an end, Okonkwo was so eager to return and sort of restore, what was there. And in his mind, he concluded that maybe the people were not fighting, these changes and these systems that are brought because, they don't have that leader who he is, right? And so he came, he returned, and he started wanting to influence, calling clan meetings, let's sit and discuss this, let's fight against these systems that are brought to impose our values as a culture. And to his dismay, his efforts were falling on deafened ears, right? And he felt that no, maybe these people, maybe they don't understand. Yeah, we can fight. I am willing to fight, and they were not necessarily talking about fighting. And he was striving for, for the need for people to fight for what belongs to them. And so it so happened that. in one of the, on one of the days, while they were at a marketplace meeting, the clan meeting once again was gathered, and they were discussing certain issues. And messengers came brought by the commanders, were in charge of the of Umofia at that time, right, who are legally now in charge. And they came and they notify, that, okay, well, you need to break this clan meeting, right? And so Concord sort of observes what are the leaders going to say, and the leaders are sort of agreeing to this, and he sees the need to fight. So he stands up and he starts to attack the messengers, assuming that if he takes that bold step, at least the community will assist him, and it's going to start a war, which they most likely have the ability to, to undertake. To his surprise, however, the villagers don't respond the way that he expects. They allow the messengers to get away, and he sort of feels as if he is not supported as much as he was hoping he would be. And so again, because of this that happens, he feels as if, what, he's the one now who is, the outcast in the situation. It seems like all of these people have accepted the system. He's the one who's the outcast, and he knows he's not strong enough to fight against such a system by himself. So we find him overcome by a lot of different emotions, even a fear, right? That these people, these white people, could come and attack him, and he doesn't want to fall on white hands, and so he runs away, and he hangs himself in his home. Now we have been following Okonkwo and his life and appreciating him for who he is, and starting off from how he wanted to not end up in a shameful manner as what his dad, as how his dad ended up. But in the end, we see that the very same fears that Okonkwo began with, in the end, he also dies that shameful death. He killed himself. It was a shameful kind of occurrence. Um, the very same identity that he tried so much to uphold, and be a part of, was lost. And so it brings a lot of questions that, maybe had he strived to be true to himself, maybe to find himself, maybe accept himself for who he is, and not try to attach to an identity of the society, because hey, the values of the society can change, as they've proven in the situation to do so. And it's not about just one person, it is about the collective. But every individual in that society needs to be able to have, their values, which will not be influenced by other people. And so in his situation, he had lost his values, and his values were the ones that, were the societal values. And so when those changed, he felt like he lost himself, right? Yeah, he felt like, what was he going to live for if all of what he had worked so hard, to become is now changed, is no longer valued, is no longer something that's going to give him respect, that respect that he felt, that he craved, yeah, so he did not necessarily have that respect for himself, but he had worked to earn that respect through the systems that were in place. And so the change of that system, sort of caused him to a major panic. Okay, so ultimately he dies, and this is what we get to see, and we sort of feel bad of his experience, and we hope that things could have turned out a bit differently for Okonkwo, right? And again, it brings a cause or a point of discussion and debate, for us as a society, right? Is it wise to attach yourself to an organization? We see people attach themselves to a religious organization, right? Their values are those of the organization, not necessarily their own. And so, if that organization changes their values, that means your values need to change, or you have to question your values because those values have changed. Similarly to cultural people that would attach culture, as if their values are what the culture believes, and a change in that system, a change in those values would lead to a person questioning who they are. So we see that. And some people in discussions would even express the importance of you having your own values first, your own identity first, your own appreciation first before you join and become part of a group. You need to begin with you and your love and your appreciation. Accept both your strengths as well as your weaknesses, and don't allow yourself to be run by this fear, and such that it takes away from you living your life. All right. And then the beauty of it all is when we look at the plot diagram. Okay, this is now my favorite part. When you look at the plot diagram, okay, so it begins off with, this is what we have. We've got the exposition, we have the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and the resolution. Just to give an overview, the exposition is where you will find the different settings, right? The settings, as well as the settings, as well as the problem, right? And what is the problem? What is the issue that needs to be resolved? And then, in line with what the problem is or the issue is in the exposition, is how you would be able to assess at the end in the resolution if whether or not this was resolved or not, yeah, successfully or not. So in the exposition, we see the different settings, right? There's a setting of the marketplace described as a place of festivity and very bustling place, right? A lot of activities happening in the marketplace, but also the very place of important decisions, are taking place, decisions which affect, the entire, the run of the entire village. Okay, we find all of those in that exposition. The different settings for marketplace, as well as we have the evil forest. Okay, the evil place that is cursed, but the very same place where the church becomes built, a place which becomes a place of mystery, and wonder. Like, hey, what's happening? Does it carry as much power as we think that it does? Are some curses, intended to change after some time? Certain things are questionable or are questioned because of how the church was able to bloom in that evil forest. We also got to see, different setting, which is Okonkwo's compound and how he was running his household. That is one kind of a setting that we see as well. Okay, as well as when things were not going well for him in Mafia, there was another setting in his mother's hometown when he had to rebuild himself, under the guidance of Uchendo, his uncle. So those different settings we see being shared, right? In the book, things fall apart. Identity is an issue. Okay, so our main hero, our main character, our Conco, begins with wanting to detach from one form of identity and striving to attach to another form of identity. Excuse me, one that he perceives to be grandeur, to be much better. So he strives to, to attach to that kind of an identity better, right, than the one that he began with. And then, we also see and we follow how that identity, is okay and it's great and it gives him the reputation that he wants, it gives him the respect that he wants. But later on, the very same identity changes, because it's a societal identity, it changes. And because of that, he now feels he's lost, right? He feels like he's lost the plot because, what identity does he have other than that, of the community which he strives so much to be attached to or attached with. Okay, and so that becomes the problem, right? An issue of identity, an issue of not accepting yourself and the flaws that, unfortunately you have, not accepting, certain things about yourself, wanting to run away from certain things, such that, it could have even led that, his anger, the tantrums that he threw, his aggressiveness could have also been a result of, issues, because of what he was not dealing with. He did not come across as a person who would deal with emotions. Yeah, like the emotion that we see of Okonka is one of, let's fight. It's or I beat you up if you're not doing what I'm telling you to do. Or I love you because you're doing what I say. I love you because you're sharing of the same spirit that I have. So We see that in Okonkwo as well. Then there's a bit of the rising action. Okay, so we see him pursuing an identity. Then him fighting and beating a Malenza the cat, for example. Him fighting and being determined to not be like his father. Detaching from this identity. Him fighting to become a person who has a voice in clan meetings. Okay, so we see him pursuing this identity which he perceives as more grandeur. We even see him overcoming, right? All of what he puts himself to doing, he gets to do it, and he gets to do it well. So we look at him and we appreciate him. We're inspired by him, right? Wow, we want our young people to be more like Okonkwo, accomplish what you set your mind to accomplish. Yeah, these are messages which Okonkwo is all about. Portraying, right? He comes across as a hero because, again, he started off with nothing, and he goes out and he's standing for the values of the people, and he comes out and, this is what he does. He's that strong leader, right? Yeah, and however, in the end, things don't really turn out well for him. We see his family as well in the rising action, the kind of family that he has, how he leads his family. These are the values I expect you to abide by, subscribe to as my family, yeah, because you are sort of representing my legacy, representing my name. And so this is what you need to be doing. As well as we see values which, are important to Okongo, which include hard work, determination, being true to what you say you will do, winning at each and every time. And so this continues all the way till when we reach at the climax. Okay, so now the climax is sort of seen, right? First, before the climax, there was this incident in the rising action where he ended up being in exile, when he killed someone by accident in the marketplace and he ends up being in exile. And so in the climax, we see how a lot of what Okonkwo, had tried to accomplish, we see all of these things changing. Yeah, there's a change of tribal values, there's the arrival of, the colonizers, a lot of things that he would have wanted to have done different. A lot of things are changing around him and he's not able to influence any of them. It's more like a losing battle for him, right? His identity sort of feels like it's degrading because now the identity of the community of the Omofia people is looked down upon and replaced by a new identity. This is now what people are supposed to be doing. This is how they're supposed to govern things. These are the laws that they need to abide by, right? Because they're being imposed. And so a loss of what Okonkwo had strived so much, to influence and be a part of, he's seeing all of this and it's affecting him because, as much as you'd like to change it, he's trapped because he cannot change it, right? He's stuck in the one place and where he doesn't have a voice. So all of these changes happen, right, which definitely influence Okonkwo. And he goes out, he goes and he fights, to fight to stand for what he feels the community should be like is representing. And when he fights, right, when he fights in that marketplace, attacking the messengers and expecting that the community is going to respond, right? There's that moment of, okay, what's going to happen next? He begins, that fight, but then he's not supported. That disappointment that he feels, that, overwhelm of all of this that he'd worked towards that's not being followed by everyone else, it sort of changes. It becomes that climax that also comes and changes things for him, such that in the falling action, Okongo is so overwhelmed, he starts to run away. He feels the shame, he feels the fear that, now, they'll be able to come after him and find him because he will be alone. He's not supported by the group anymore. He feels that element of loss, and he feels disconnected to the community. He feels that disunity. And so he runs ultimately to when excuse me, ultimately to when he hangs himself, and he dies this shameful, this tragic death. He'd lost his identity. All of what he worked for was in vain, right? And he dies again, shameful death, similar to his own father, whom he wanted nothing to be like, right? And so we see this in the plot diagram, starting from the exposition, all the way to to the resolution, where we look and feel as if, that identity began, and it was lost in the end. It was a lost identity, which led to him losing himself and feeling as if all of his hard work was in vain, unfortunately. Do share your analysis as well of the plot diagram. Which part appealed to you the most? Which part do you absolutely agree with? Which part can you add to this, right? Yeah, when making your own assessment of Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. But otherwise, that's going to be it for now. Look forward to the next book, which is going to be The River Between in our series one of Afro-Lit Marathon. Thank you for sticking around. Once again, if you'd like to participate in the selection of the other, books to be discussed in other series, do join our Facebook group as well. Thank you so much. We'll see you again next time.